Hey, everybody. Welcome back to our latest installment of MSP Business School. I'm really excited by this episode. I've got a gentleman joining us today that I recently met, and he is a trip to say the least, but also one of the more interesting individuals I've encountered out on the circuit these days. But before I introduce him to you, I want to say hello to my cohorts in crime, Rob Rogers and Tim McNeil. How you guys doing today?
Doing well, sir. How are you doing today?
I am doing fantastic. Thank you.
You living the dream down there?
Always, man. Always, you know.
There you go.
It's all good. Now to kind of go a little bit into our guest today. So we've got Miles Walker joining us today. And Miles Walker is one of the channel chiefs over at Graphus. And he's going to tell us a little bit about what Graphus does in a minute, but I got to open this thing up with a little short story. So I recently got to meet Miles on the road. We were at James Kernan, who I know some of you might know has been on our show before, and he has his Millionaire Mastermind event. And I had never met Miles till that day. And when I got out there, and I could tell right off the bat, man, this guy, he's got flow. And, you know, I will say this for him, and we'll get more into it, but he put on a presentation like I haven't seen in a long time. He kept the crowd entertained. He poked a little fun at himself along the way. And it's the first time in about 10 years, man, I felt a little intimidated going up and doing my speech. I'm like, how am I supposed to follow that? I felt like that comedian that just followed Seinfeld after he killed, you know what I mean? And so now I got to go out there and, you know, everybody's had their big laugh and now they just want to go home.
Right.
But, you know, beyond that, I got to know Miles a little bit personally, and he's one of the good ones out there on the tour today. And he's really a genuine good guy. So, you know, I'd love for him to tell a little bit about himself, because his path to Graphus is a little unconventional from what we usually hear in the industry. And he doesn't come from pure tech background. So with that, Miles, welcome.
Well, I've never been introduced and had a Seinfeld reference. Brian, you win the cake on that one, because Seinfeld, I've seen him live 3 times. And I don't know if you guys know this, because you guys are all in the US, right?
Yeah.
Right.
That's right. Yeah, so there's this show that's just come out on Netflix in Canada called Seinfeld. Have you guys heard of this?
We have, yeah. It's one of the new ones.
It's new. Yeah.
Only jokes aside, yeah. So I watched every episode, but thank you for that. So Brian, we met San Diego, James Kernan's conference. It was a great show. I think we ended up at a table together. We bonded over, I don't know if it was cigars and just life, or
there's always a chance of cigars, but I think it was just life, man. I mean, you know, you bring it, and I think Graphus is lucky to have you, and I'm putting that on record so you can save that soundbite.
I'll send that to my boss after this. But you know what? We talked initially about football. We're talking fantasy.
We did. We started there,
and then we dove into us. And I can't wait to see you again in person, because we had a great time. And it's amazing, because I do a lot of these conferences now, and a lot of the times, depending on who's there, really makes the conference. And I'm in a 2-year horn. You compared me to Seinfeld, but you did really make my first California conference ever an enjoyable one. So
yeah, we had some really good people at that conference, and it definitely was a fun time. But you know, it was an eclectic mix of people too, which I always think makes it a little bit more entertaining. But you know, I think we've done enough promoting a James now, and we got to move on to you a little bit. So tell us a little bit about your background and how you wound up at Graphus.
So I'm based in Vancouver in Canada here. I was actually born in England, but grew up here in Canada. And I actually came back to Canada in the late 2008, and I was working in the travel industry. So I brought a business from London to Toronto, and I opened the business here. And I got kind of thrown into the world of the travel industry, and I'd never worked in the travel industry before. I don't know if you guys remember the chef Jamie Oliver. He had remember him? He had a pretty failed TV show in the US, where he actually came to West Virginia, which at the time was the most obese state in America, and he tried to teach, I guess you'd say, lower income families how to eat healthy. And I guess the Americans weren't a fan of him telling them in a posh British accent how to cook and eat. And so I worked on his TV show for 2 years, traveling around the country, doing his show, and fell into travel. A guy took a flyer on me, and I ended up working in travel for 13 years. Pandemic hit. I lose my job. I thought, Brian, you'll laugh at this. I thought I was untouchable in the travel industry. Okay. So there's 30 sales staff. They kept one, and I was one of the 29 that got the cut. And they've still only kept one. So 2 years later, I had a couple friends of mine who worked in tech and said, "You'd love this space. There's good people. It's all about relationship building. And you know what? You're a sponge. You know, you'll suck up the information quickly." And that's kind of how I fell into tech. I had a couple friends who championed me. They reached out to a couple friends at Kaseya, this new business unit. Kaseya had just bought Graphus, or Graphus had come into the Kaseya family.
Mhm.
And yeah, a couple months after leaving the travel industry, I moved into the tech space. That's the quick version. I could give you the 12-minute version over a beer or two, but that's the 1-minute version. So.
Yeah, and you know, when you get that beer or two too, what ends up coming out is Miles is well traveled in many respects. He's lived in quite a few places, done quite a few interesting things along the way. And you know, if we have some time, we'll hit upon a couple of other good stories that I heard. But with that said, let's let's kind of get into a little bit for listeners that might not be familiar with Graphus, because you know, certainly as their visibility is growing, now being part of the Kaseya family, there's still a lot of folks out there that aren't familiar with what Graphus really does. So maybe you can give us a thumbnail on that, Miles.
Yeah, for sure. Here's my little elevator pitch, you could say. Graphus is a phishing solution. And when I'm talking to different groups, I always say a couple years ago, there was maybe 1 or 2 phishing solutions out there. And a lot of people didn't even know about those because they would kind of fall under the secure email gateways. That's what people use for protection against phishing. Now there's definitely over 10 companies that are doing phishing. And Graphus was being actually used by Kaseya internally for about 18 months. And you know, then they came into the fold with the Kaseya family. So they actually got to test out the product. They loved the product. And we're an affordable cloud-based phishing solution that embeds with Office 365 and G Suite. So you can keep, you know, what you currently have, and you can add us on, or you could, you know, just add in Graphus and maybe get rid of some of your other solutions.
Beautiful. And, you know, it's amazing, right? Because you would think that phishing has been around long enough that you would have thought there was more solutions on the market, you know, prior to Graphus really getting out there and doing it. But it's such a large problem. I mean, we've been, you know, we might be familiar with, you know, what are some of the things that, you know, is really driving the industry these days?
Yeah, well, Brian, I think you make some good points. And I know people do click on phishing emails. And the one thing we always say is that people, you know, a couple of years ago, would have maybe seen a link and gone, "Oh, okay, that's fine." But these threat actors, these cyber criminals, are completely evolving. So the people that we would have considered to be stupid a couple of years ago, you know what? I know I've had links come in, and I'm like, "Ooh, what do I do here?" And I mean, I'm not saying I'm an expert, but you know, I've been doing this now for a while, and you know, there are patterns that these cyber criminals know and they follow, and they trick you. I recently had one kind of going off the phishing tangent on Instagram. And it was from a local hotel chain. So a local hotel chain got hacked. They sent me a link. And what these cyber criminals do, they want to create an onus on time. So they said, "Miles, you've won 3-night stay and a pair of customized Converse Hotel Z shoes." And I was like, "This is great. I only played the game yesterday." And they gave me 10 minutes. So they said, "You have 10 minutes to book in your nights." I clicked on the link, picked my nights, and then it said, "Yep, put your credit card in here to confirm the hotel booking." And I worked in travel. Everyone needs a credit card for a hotel booking. Right. And it's just an example of how these criminals are evolving. Like Instagram. I don't know if you guys know, Tim or Rob, have you heard the term smishing before? I know it sounds a little disgusting. I know.
No, I have not heard that.
I'm afraid to say yes.
Yeah. So where's this going?
Don't worry, it's nothing. You know what? You can Google it. Don't worry. You know, your wife or girlfriend or friends won't find anything wrong.
Okay.
But smishing is SMS phishing, and this is the way a lot of the times these criminals are looking at different ways. So phishing, there's that. There's smishing. There's Instagram hacks. There's everything. So. Bringing that all back to Graphus, you mentioned about our target market. Basically, MSPs are the ones who are doing most of our bookings. We do have quite a few MMEs as well. And we're looking for companies that want to protect themselves. And hopefully they realize that phishing is a big issue. I know, Brian, you mentioned some facts or some stats. Phishing's up 767% since the start of the pandemic. So it's here to stay. I also mentioned as well, when I talk to people, that in the next 2 years, every one of us is going to have some type of phishing protection on our personal and our work emails. If you guys are a little archaic, like I am, and you still use Hotmail, does anyone here still use Hotmail?
No.
That belongs to you, Miles.
I mean, but you could do AOL. I mean, AOL's still around somewhere.
Right.
I'm not talking AOL or MSN message, but I got the email in the 90s, and everyone just remembers it. All my friends from all over the world, contact miles@hotmail.com. So you remember that. And I still use it, not primarily, but I still have it. And they've Hotmail's just added a phishing button in the last year to their platform. And I'll tell you right now, Gmail's going to have one pretty soon if they don't already have something in place. But phishing is going to be something that we're all going to have some type of solution in the next 12 to 18 months. And that's kind of how we lead when we talk about Graphus, that this is something that affects us. It's never going to leave. It's here to stay. And, you have to have some solutions in place for that. Sorry.
Are you seeing, you said that since the pandemic hit, it's up over 700% as far as the phishing attacks. Do you mean that people are clicking on it 700% more, or there are 700% more attacks and it's going up proportionately? Like,
you got it, Tim. So
are people educated enough to not go that 700%, hopefully? So
one of the points you said, so 700% more attacks. So right after the pandemic, it's actually pretty crazy. So March 13th to 16th, depending on when you say the COVID hit, there was a 2-week lull and phishing attacks went right down. And that's because the cyber criminals were actually figuring out their own hybrid model, because they all couldn't work at their cyber farms and their offices anymore, because they actually do have offices, which is crazy. And so cyber attacks went down for 2 weeks. They figured out the hybrid model. Everyone had their laptops. And then the phishing attacks started. And why they've been so more prominent, and they've been hitting people more, and people have been clicking, is because in our old environment, Tim, you could go knock on your buddy who works in IT in the office and say, "Hey, what's this?"
Yeah. Is it helping tag that? How does that actually operate to reduce those clicks coming from my community?
Of course. So it happens before and also within. And that's the I'll get a little scary here, but the AI technology going to work. So what Graphus actually does. So I mean, Brian, you've emailed me before. So when your email comes in, the first time it comes in, I'm going to get a warning banner, and it's going to say the type of phishing email potentially it is from you. So it'll say, Brian is not a trusted sender. Be careful about this. And I'll click report false positive. So the next time Brian emails me, it'll come through. But here's a caveat. Say Brian gets hacked by a group of North Korean hackers and they take over his account. I get an email from Brian, but it's not actually from Brian. Our AI technology will know that the IP address is different, and they look at about 50 different attributes from each particular email and set up a trust score. Once again, you will never see this trust score. That's all done internally. And so that's why we like to say, before the email and then while they're in the email, because it obviously is getting smarter by the employee itself giving the technology that information. So it actually figures out, who these people are, who I have a relationship with, and how I also communicate.
That's pretty interesting, but it's funny. You see valid emails come from different sources, right? So when I think of phishing, I always think of, hey, I got an email from somebody and it says it's me, but then when I click on the header, I might see that it's some gobbledygook email that sits behind the scenes, right? But then there's things like, I'll even say, like our software system, we use SendGrid as the underlying carrier. Our customers change their CNAMEs to match up with what they are as SendGrid, and then that handles DKIM and SPF, right? But the reality is, theoretically, Brian Doyle now has 2 email addresses, right? When I send from my system, it's coming out as me, not on behalf, nothing like that. And then it's also coming from me from my traditional email system. How does Graphus deal with that? And how does it kind of know that is does it look at the underlying sender and say, oh, okay, we know this is SendGrid, that's probably valid, or anything like that?
Yeah, so you're right, bang on. So because there's 50 attributes, it doesn't just, I'm going to kind of give you just some examples of other things that we look at so you can get a little bit of an idea. And it's really interesting when you actually hear this. So, Graphus, we'll look at the time of day. So we look at it, we look for anomalies, as not going too much into the weeds. Like we look at the devices that they're being sent from, attachments, emails, domain, sender, country, message ID, subject, URL, time of day, and then about 40 more different attributes to actually figure out who the person is and how they're communicating. And through the AI technology, it figures out whether, they're never going to figure out 100%. We like to say 99%. And if we're throwing out numbers, from our records, we're 60% more efficient than a secure email gateway, because there's never going to be a piece of technology that can stop anybody.
Yeah.
And so we just want to give as many options to stop. And I mean, Brian, we talked about this, I think briefly, is that, pairing that up with some type of security awareness training is a big one. Not that Graphus does that. I mean, our partner ID Agent, or sister company, they do that. But I think it's pretty unbelievable that about 80% of the world can't detect a sophisticated phishing email. A simple one, all of us would be able to see. But, but an actual sophisticated one, that's a lot harder.
Well, when you illustrate what you experience with Instagram, that's pretty common. And I'd feel pretty secure on that if it was really coming from that account.
Yeah, exactly.
Asking me for things that are traditional. I think the only thing I'd probably be questioning is the giveaway, right? Because the giveaway's a pretty valuable giveaway, right?
Yeah. And I mean, the thing is that what they did with the Instagram one, which is so unbelievable, they actually created a fake Instagram account. So they hadn't actually hacked into the existing account. They created a fake one, which looked identical. They took the same photos. They managed to amass thousands of followers within a couple of days. Yeah. And that's why I almost bit. And to be honest, I pulled the rank card and called the hotel up and I said, "Hi, Miles Walker," them, and they didn't know about this. And I mean, brand reputation. I mean, I know I don't really want to use them now, knowing that they have such lax security, right?
Yeah.
And they're going to have my credit card info, and they're getting breached on Instagram. But once again, they're a small hotel chain. Everyone thinks nowadays, oh yeah, like they're not going after the small guys. But an interesting fact, over 50% of phishing attacks actually go to small and medium-sized businesses. So they're, it used to be 90% with just large-scale companies, but as you probably know, they all have good solutions in place. They have cybersecurity training. They have fundamental systems to block this stuff, and the small and medium-sized businesses don't spend the money on it.
Yeah. You just don't have it yet. Yeah. Still going downstream for sure.
Yeah, it is. So, and I mean, I always talk about some of the big players, like when I'm doing my talks, that get hacked, the Microsofts, Twitter, Google often has attacks. And then I like to dive into some of the small ones, and the small ones are way harder to come by because, if you're a small private school in my hometown that got hacked recently for $16,000, you don't want people to know that. I mean, no parent of a student who wants to go to this private school wants all their kids' information on the dark web. Yeah. Right. No. And so if there can debate between two private schools, one that's been hacked and one that hasn't, I mean, what would you choose?
Yeah. 100%.
And then so many small businesses these days are getting hacked. I had a friend reach out from Australia, and her local CrossFit gym got hacked. And, they didn't ask for tons of money. They asked for $9,000. Yeah. And their whole booking system, because they had to book in the dates and the times, because CrossFit, you can only have 10 or 15 people working per instructor. So they couldn't. She asked me for help, and I said, no, I don't help after the fact. I help.
Yeah, right. I tried to educate before.
And that's the thing.
But we can help you in the future, right?
Well,
but all kidding aside, though, right? When you hear these things, it does come back to the ransom. The folks that are coming in and hacking you just want money. They're going to ask for the moon, but you could settle for the stars, right? And that's the crazy part. I've heard $3 million asks get whittled down to $11,000, right? So
Sure.
there is this little piece of how much do I have to spend to get out of this problem when it happens, and how much should I be spending to protect it? And I think that's the part that our community is still trying to educate our end users. Yeah, you could potentially get out for a smaller sum of money, and maybe it's not too disruptive, and maybe you can hide the reputation risk, although it's kind of hard. But isn't it worth investing in trying to put this barrier up in advance? Isn't it better to get that posture to where it needs to be, so you're mitigating the risk and reducing the chance of you being one of the statistics out there?
Totally. Well, I talked. Yeah, I had 2 keynotes yesterday, and I actually talked. And I mean, Brian, I'm quite interactive with the crowd. I'll ask questions.
Yep.
And, I said, has anyone had one of the Amazon gift card attacks? And 2 people raised their hand. 2 people lost. In my crowd of 35, 38 people, 2 people lost over $2,000 each. And I said, I was sitting in my last job with my old boss, got an email, and it said, "Hey, bro," it came from his email. I'm not going to say his name, but it came from his email. It had his signature. It said, "Hey, bro, I want to do something nice for the company over Christmas." And I said, "Oh, that's cool." And he's like, "Can you buy everyone a $100 gift card from Amazon, but don't tell the accounting team?" And the accounting team is his wife, because it's a small company. And I'm like, so cool of him that he's doing that, because we've had a brutal year. It's been COVID. Everyone's struggling. This is going to help. And so I said, "Yeah, of course." And he's like, "But do it in the next 20 minutes because I want to give them all these Amazon gift cards at lunch today." I'm like, what they do is they create the time ownership. You need to do this now. And I'm like, okay, emotions. He's like, "You know what? I want you to do this because, you're a big part of my team." I'm like, "Oh, that's so thoughtful." And so, of course, I asked him, I said, "Dude, it's a great thing you're doing." And he said, what's a great thing?" And he's like, no, the gift cards. That's so thoughtful. He's like, "What are you talking about?" And I showed him, because we were actually in a meeting, and I showed him, and he's like, "Oh no." And it wasn't obviously him. And I had 2 guys yesterday who hit on that, and they always prey on the low-hanging fruit. So they're not messaging the famous Brian Doyles and Rob Rogers and Tim McNeils. They're going after the person who's a part-time worker, maybe who's working at reception, who doesn't have that tech background. And they're saying, they use the name, they say something thoughtful, they get in the mind mentally, then they ask for something, and they say, "You got to do it quick, and you got to do it now."
See, Miles, I'm gonna tell you a story now that tells you they do go after anybody, because I was consulting to a group, and I got one of those emails exactly like you laid out from the owner of this group I was consulting to. I just happened to have an email on their company behalf for work I did for them. So when it came in there, they asked the same thing. "Hey, we'd like to buy 5 of the cards, right?" But now I knew this was a scam. So now it's time to have some fun. And I said, "How far can I stretch this out?" So I came back and said, "Wow, that's really nice. Yeah, let me do that." Then I sent back an email. "Hey, Paul and Jim really like Google Play, though. They don't have Apple iPhones," or whatever it was, at that point in time.
Yeah.
And I went back and forth. I was, but, if you see it as a cyber guy, you can have a little bit of fun with it too along the way. But it is crazy, though. You're spot on. They look for that place where they think it's a vulnerability in the environment. Obviously, they didn't think I was part of the executive team, because I wasn't for this company. I was just a consultant who happened to have an email on their domain, and they came at me with that ownership email. So I think we've just got a few minutes left in this episode.
Sure.
I'd be remiss if I didn't ask you, Miles. So, you're out there, you're hitting the marketplace, you're out there doing speaking, and you are really interactive. Do you practice your speeches ahead of time? What advice can you give to people that are working on the circuit so they can put on a better presentation? Because, without blowing more smoke, I had more fun watching yours than doing my own. It was a trip, watching how interactive you got, and how much you even put some self-deprecating humor into it as well.
Sure.
Miles let the Canadian freak flag fly with his maple syrup.
Well, I find, at least coming from the travel industry, we were very engaging with the audience. So we would actually like to ask questions. And I find that, obviously during a chat like this, nobody wants to be spoken to. And that's what I think that I would love to see, a little bit of a shift where people actually ask questions of the crowd. Sometimes people go to these events and they're tired, they're busy, and they don't want to be interactive. But honestly, bridging that gap by asking a question or two, or seeing who these people are. I think I asked a question at the start of ours, who had been to Canada, and like just seeing who raised their hand was interesting. Like one of the guys from our event that we were at, Brian, he had driven down from Winnipeg, which is a 42-hour drive. And so finding those little connections with people either before the event or during the event, I think has done really well for me. I come from a radio background. This is like, I've had many different lives. I'm like a cat, I guess. And I worked in radio for 2.5 years. And part of my job was I was the warm-up guy before all the big bands would come on. And I'm not doing comedy or anything, but cool. I'd be the guy presenting, you know, introducing the band. And so many times I would be up on stage and, you know, Axl Rose doesn't want to come out for 30 more minutes. So like, Miles, go talk to people. So it kind of just became something that I got used to. Wow. Like I hosted a Canadian Idol episode. I know you guys have, America's Got Talent. We have a smaller version here in Canada. And I remember going there and, you know, doing the introduction, introducing the people, and then having to actually interact with the crowd for 5 minutes, then another 5 minutes and another 5 minutes because these performers don't come on. So I think the biggest thing I would say advice-wise is find something where the crowd can actually be interested, and don't give away the house. Don't tell them everything about a product. You know, dangle the carrot a little and make them be excited to hear a little bit more about what you want to speak about.
Beautiful. Good tips for everybody. And the biggest one, break down the fourth wall, right? Get engaged. Totally. So with that said, Miles, maybe you could share with everybody how they can reach you. And then Rob, maybe you could take us home, right?
Sure. Yeah.
Okay. I'm going to put my LinkedIn and my email.
We'll put up your LinkedIn there, but just say it out loud, baby.
Okay. So this is going to sound a little bit, how do I say this? Douchey, but my LinkedIn is Miles Walker 9th. And that's because my father is the